The morning my sister signed the papers behind my back, I was in surgery, trying to save a dog everyone else had already given up on. Her name was Willow, a senior golden retriever with cloudy eyes and a tumor pressing against her spleen. The kind of case clinics quietly suggest euthanasia for, because it's cleaner, cheaper, and easier to explain to the owners. But Willow wagged her tail when she saw me. Not because she felt better, because she trusted me. That mattered. I'm Dr. Hannah Cole. I was 32 years old at the time, a licensed veterinarian in upstate New York, running on caffeine, compassion, and the belief that doing the right thing eventually protects you. It doesn't always. I didn't know yet that while I was standing under harsh surgical lights, gloved hands steady, my own family was deciding my future without me. That while I was fighting to keep a living thing alive, they were quietly cutting me out of everything I thought we shared. The surgery took 3 hours. Willow made it through. When I finally peeled off my gloves and scrubbed my hands raw at the sink, my phone was buzzing in my locker. 6 missed calls, all from my mother. That alone told me something was wrong. I called her back while driving home, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and dog hair. She answered on the first ring. "Hannah," she said, her voice too controlled. "Where are you?" "Just finished surgery," I said. "What's going on?" A pause. The kind people use when they're deciding how much of the truth you can handle. "Your sister stopped by," she said. "We had a meeting." "What kind of meeting?" I asked. "With the lawyer." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What lawyer?" Another pause. "The family lawyer." I pulled over without fully realizing I'd done it. "What was the meeting about?" I asked. Silence. Then she said it. "The clinic, my clinic." Cole Veterinary Care wasn't just a business. It was my life. A small but respected practice my father and I had built together 10 years earlier, when I came home after vet school, instead of taking a higher-paying job in the city. He'd handled the finances, I handled the medicine. It was supposed to be temporary. Then he got sick. Then he passed away. And suddenly the clinic was the last place where I still felt close to him. "I wasn't invited," I said. "It was last minute," my mother replied. "Emily was already here." Emily, my younger sister, 30, charming, practical. The kind of person who smiled while rearranging the furniture of your life and then acted surprised when you tripped. "What did she sign?" I asked. My mother exhaled slowly. "Hannah," she said, "you need to come home." That's when I knew. Not suspected. Not feared. Knew. I drove the rest of the way in silence, replaying every small moment I'd ignored over the past year. Emily asking questions about the clinic's revenue. Emily offering to help with paperwork. Emily casually mentioning how stressful it must be to run a business and practice medicine at the same time. I'd thought she was being supportive. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a full minute before going inside. My mother was at the kitchen table. Emily was there too, legs crossed, a folder resting neatly in front of her like a prop. "Hannah," Emily said brightly, "you look exhausted." I didn't respond. I set my keys down slowly. "What did you do?" I asked. Emily glanced at our mother, then back at me. "I took some of the pressure off," she said. "You've been stretched too thin. We were worried." "We." That word again. "You transferred ownership," I said flatly. "It's temporary," she replied. "A restructuring." I looked at the folder. Legal paper. My name, typed neatly in places I hadn't signed. "You didn't have the authority," I said. Emily smiled. Not cruelly, confidently. "Mom did," she said. "Dad set it up that way. Remember?" I did remember. What I remembered was my father saying, "You'll handle the animals. We'll make sure the rest is taken care of." I thought he meant together. What he'd meant was eventually. "What exactly did you sign?" I asked. Emily slid the folder toward me. "Operational control," she said. "I'm just stepping in. For now." For now is how control always enters the room. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I picked up the folder and read every page. By the time I reached the end, I understood something that took years to fully accept. My family didn't see my love for animals as strength. They saw it as a weakness. They thought because I chose care over control, I would never fight back. They were wrong. But I didn't say that yet. I closed the folder and looked at my sister. "Is this legal?" I asked. Emily shrugged. The lawyer said it was fine. That was the moment. Not the betrayal itself. The moment I realized that what I'd been calling love, loyalty, family support, had always come with conditions. And the moment I stopped assuming I had any obligation to protect people who had already decided I was expendable. I handed the folder back to her. "Okay," I said. Emily blinked. "Okay?" "Yes," I replied. "I understand." She relaxed, just slightly. That was her mistake. Because while she thought she'd taken something from me, what she'd actually done was force my hand. And once you stop trying to keep the peace, you start seeing options you didn't allow yourself to see before. I went upstairs that night, sat on my bed, still in my scrubs, and stared at the wall until dawn. I didn't plan revenge. I planned clarity. And that was far more dangerous. The first thing I did the next morning was go to the clinic early, earlier than usual, before the reception lights were on, before the phones started ringing, before anyone could tell me what had changed overnight. The building smelled the same. Disinfectant, coffee, faint traces of fur, and something metallic I'd never been able to name. Familiar, grounding. If I closed my eyes, I could almost pretend nothing had happened. Almost. I unlocked my office and found the door already open. That shouldn't have been possible. My name was still on the door, but the desk inside didn't look like mine anymore. The framed photo of my father holding a rescued beagle was gone. The handwritten notes from former clients had been moved into a single box on the floor. My computer screen was dark, but the keyboard had been rearranged, as if someone else's hands had already decided where things belong. I stood there longer than I should have. Not shocked, just cataloging. Control doesn't announce itself loudly. It rearranges quietly and waits for you to adapt. "Hannah?" I turned. It was Mark, our senior vet tech. Mid-40s, been with us since the beginning. Loyal to the work, if not always the people behind it. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He hesitated. "That told me everything." "They said it was temporary," he said. "Your sister came by yesterday with your mom. The lawyer was on speakerphone." I nodded once. "What exactly did they say?" I asked. Mark shifted his weight. That Emily would be handling operations for a while. Scheduling, finances, vendor contracts. You'd still be the medical director. Medical director. A title without authority. I thanked him and told him to get started with the day. My voice sounded normal. That was important. People listen differently when you don't sound wounded. At 9 sharp, Emily walked in. Not rushed, not apologetic, confident. She wore a blazer that didn't belong in a veterinary clinic, and heels that clicked just loudly enough to announce her presence. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "We should talk." I followed her into the break room, where she'd already spread out a stack of printed spreadsheets. "I ran the numbers," she said. "You're overextending yourself. Emergency cases, pro bono rescues, discounted surgeries." I leaned against the counter. "You mean the work," I said. "I mean inefficiency," she replied smoothly. "You can't save everything." I looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't malicious. She was practical in a way that left no room for anything that didn't produce a clean outcome. "You didn't ask me," I said. "You wouldn't have agreed," she replied. There it was. Consent bypassed in the name of convenience. "Do you know what happened last night?" I asked. She frowned. "What?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo. Willow. Still groggy, wrapped in blankets. Alive. "This dog would have been put down at 3 other clinics," I said. "She has another year, maybe 2, with her family." Emily glanced at the photo, then looked away. "That's nice," she said, "but that doesn't change the balance sheet." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "It changes how I see you." Her jaw tightened. "Hannah, don't be dramatic," she said. "This is business. You've always struggled with that distinction." She wasn't wrong. I'd always believed medicine came first. That business was the structure that supported care, not the other way around. My father had indulged that belief. My sister had not. "What exactly do you plan to change?" I asked. Emily slid a document toward me. "No more unpaid rescue cases," she said. "No extended treatment plans without deposits. And we're reviewing staff. Some roles may be redundant." Redundant. I thought of Jenna, our kennel assistant, who stayed late to comfort anxious animals. of Luis, who volunteered on weekends at the shelter and brought in cases we couldn't turn away. "You're cutting people," I said. "I'm optimizing," she replied. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said again. She watched me carefully this time. "That's it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "For now." After she left, I went back to my office and closed the door. I didn't sit down. I paced. Not out of panic, but calculation. She had control of operations, that much was clear. What she didn't have was my license, my reputation, my relationships with clients, shelters, rescue networks, and regulatory boards. And she didn't have the full story of how the clinic was structured after my father died. Because when he got sick, he trusted me with things he hadn't trusted anyone else with. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and took out a thin folder I hadn't looked at in years. Estate documents, amendments, a handwritten note on yellowed paper. "Hannah, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain everything properly. The clinic isn't just an asset, it's a responsibility. Don't let anyone turn it into something you wouldn't recognize. Love, Dad." I exhaled slowly. That afternoon, I received my first complaint. A longtime client called to say her appointment had been canceled. No explanation. No reschedule. She said the new manager decided my dog wasn't a priority, the woman told me, voice shaking. I apologized. Not for Emily, for the disruption. By the end of the day, I'd received 3 similar calls. Patterns form quickly when people assume you won't push back. That evening, I didn't go home. I drove to the county animal shelter instead. The director, a woman named Karen Morales, met me at the door. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like someone rearranged your spine." "Something like that," I said. We walked past rows of kennels, dogs barking, cats watching silently. "Emily came by," Karen said casually. "Asked about renegotiating our partnership." My steps slowed. "What did she say?" I asked. "That we should prepare for fewer referrals," Karen replied. "She said your clinic is shifting focus." I stopped walking. "And what did you say?" I asked. Karen smiled thinly. "I said I'd wait to hear it from you." That's when it clicked. Emily wasn't just taking control. She was changing the clinic's identity. And if she succeeded, there would be nothing left for me to reclaim. That night, sitting alone in my car outside the shelter, I made my first real decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to document everything. And then I was going to call a lawyer. Because love that strips you of choice isn't love. It's management. And I was done being managed. I didn't call a lawyer right away. That wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. The next few days were about watching, listening, letting Emily believe the transfer of power was complete. People reveal more when they think the outcome is settled. At the clinic, changes came fast. A new scheduling system appeared overnight. Appointment slots shortened. Follow-up visits flagged as non-essential. A printed memo taped to the break room fridge outlining new approval procedures for treatment plans over a certain cost. Approval from Emily, not from me. I read the memo once, then folded it neatly and slipped it into my bag. Evidence doesn't need commentary. Animals felt the shift before people did. A nervous shepherd mix refused to enter the exam room without his owner. A senior cat stopped eating after her pain medication was delayed because the invoice hadn't been approved yet. Small things, subtle things, the kind that don't show up in spreadsheets, but always show up in outcomes. Mark cornered me near the supply closet. "This isn't what we do," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "You're okay with this?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm patient." That word mattered. On Thursday, Emily called a staff meeting. She stood at the front, tablet in hand, smiling like someone who'd memorized the right leadership phrases. "We're modernizing," she said, "streamlining, protecting the long-term health of the clinic." I watched faces around the room. Confusion, worry, polite nods. Jenna raised her hand. "What about the rescue cases?" Emily smiled. "We'll still help when we can, but we can't save everyone." Silence. That sentence landed heavier than she realized. I didn't contradict her. I didn't intervene. I let the discomfort sit in the room, because discomfort is often the first step toward clarity. After the meeting, Karen from the shelter called me. "I just lost 3 foster placements," she said. 2 were scheduled surgeries you'd already approved. I closed my eyes. "Did Emily contact you again?" I asked. "Yes," she said. She asked me to put everything in writing: costs, outcomes, timeframes. That confirmed it. Emily wasn't just changing policy. She was building a paper trail, one that framed compassion as liability. That afternoon, I stayed late and pulled patient records. Not illegally, not secretly. Everything I accessed was within my rights as medical director. I documented treatment outcomes, survival rates, follow-ups, the long-term impact of early intervention. Numbers can tell different stories, depending on who holds the pen. At home, my mother called. "Hannah," she said, "your sister says you've been distant." "I've been working," I replied. "You should try to be more flexible," she said. "Emily's under a lot of pressure." I didn't argue. "I need to ask you something," I said instead. "Yes?" "Did Dad ever talk to you about the clinic after he got sick?" I asked. She hesitated. "Too long." "He trusted you," she said finally. "But he worried you'd burn yourself out." "Did he ever say he wanted Emily to run it?" I asked. Silence again. "No," she admitted. "But he assumed you'd need help." Help. That word again. That night, I opened the folder my father had left me and read everything. Not emotionally, methodically. There it was. A clause added 6 months before he died. Not highlighted, easy to miss. Operational control could be transferred temporarily only under conditions of incapacity or voluntary delegation. Temporary. And voluntary. I had done neither. The next morning, I printed copies. Not to confront Emily. Not yet. I wanted her comfortable. Because when people think they've won, they stop checking their footing. Friday afternoon, a man I didn't recognize walked into the clinic. Suit. No animal. He introduced himself as a consultant, Emily's hire. He asked to review compliance procedures, treatment authorization logs, billing practices. That was my second confirmation. Emily wasn't just managing. She was preparing to justify removing me entirely. I answered his questions politely, carefully. I didn't volunteer opinions. I let him see exactly what was being changed and when. When he left, I locked my office door and made the call I'd been waiting to make. Her name was Rachel Stein, an attorney specializing in medical practices and family-owned businesses. A former client of ours had recommended her years ago. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked one question. "Did you consent to this transfer of authority?" "No," I said. "And is there documentation stating that clearly?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. She exhaled. "Then this isn't a family disagreement," she said. "It's a legal overreach." That was the moment the ground shifted. Not because I felt powerful, because I finally understood something. I wasn't losing my clinic because I was weak. I was being pushed out because I cared. And the people doing it assumed I would never choose confrontation over compassion. They had mistaken my values for limits. I scheduled a meeting with Rachel for the following week. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't warn my mother. I kept working, kept documenting, kept saving animals where I could, quietly, within the shrinking space I was given. Because the next step wasn't emotional, it was procedural. And once you move into that space, there's no going back. The meeting with Rachel Stein took place on a rainy Monday morning, in an office that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. No inspirational posters, no soft language. Just clean lines, legal books, and a woman who listened like she was assembling a puzzle she already suspected the answer to. I told her everything again, slower this time. Dates, names, words Emily had used, what had changed at the clinic and when. Rachel didn't interrupt. She took notes by hand, which I found oddly reassuring. When I finished, she closed her notebook. "Your sister didn't just overstep," she said. "She bypassed consent, misrepresented authority, and began making material changes that could expose the clinic to regulatory risk." I nodded. That much I understood. "What she's counting on," Rachel continued, "is that you won't want to fight, that you'll step aside quietly to keep the peace." "That's what she's always counted on," I said. Rachel leaned back. "Then we do the opposite." Calmly, she outlined my options. Not theatrically, just facts. We could file an injunction to pause Emily's operational control immediately. We could request a formal accounting of every decision she'd made since taking over. We could notify the state veterinary board if medical authority was being overridden by a non-licensed administrator. Each option carried weight. None of them involved yelling. "What do you want?" Rachel asked. I thought of Willow, of the shepherd mix, of the shelter animals whose surgeries had been quietly canceled. "I want the clinic back," I said. "Not revenge, not punishment. I want control restored and documented." Rachel nodded. "Then we move in steps." The first step was a formal notice. That afternoon, Rachel sent a letter to Emily, my mother, and the family lawyer. Clear, direct. No accusations, just facts. The transfer of operational authority lacked required consent. Material changes had been enacted without proper delegation. Until the matter was resolved, all further changes were to cease. The response came faster than I expected. Emily stormed into the clinic the next morning. She didn't bother with a greeting. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, waving a copy of the letter. I looked up from my desk. "It's a notice," I said. "You received it." "You went to a lawyer," she said. "Yes," I replied. She laughed, sharp and incredulous. "Over this?" "This," I said calmly, "is my livelihood." "You're being dramatic," she snapped. "Mom agreed to everything." "Mom doesn't have a veterinary license," I said, "and neither do you." That landed. "You're undermining me in front of staff," she said. "No," I replied. "You did that when you canceled patient care without consulting the medical director." She stared at me, eyes flashing. "You think this is about animals," she said. "This is about money, about sustainability." "No," I said. "This is about control." She stepped back as if I'd struck her. "You always do this," she said. "You turn everything moral." "I turn it accountable," I replied. She left without another word. That afternoon, my mother called. "How could you do this to your sister?" she asked. "I didn't do anything to her," I said. "I protected myself." "She was trying to help you," my mother insisted. "By taking my authority?" I asked. "She thought you were overwhelmed," she said. "I was," I replied. "That didn't give her the right to take my choices away." Silence. "You're tearing the family apart," my mother said finally. I closed my eyes. "No," I said. "I'm refusing to be the piece that gets moved around to keep it intact." 2 days later, the family lawyer requested a meeting. Rachel attended with me. The lawyer was polite, defensive. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding, a difference in interpretation. Rachel slid the document across the table. "This clause is clear," she said. "Temporary authority requires voluntary delegation or incapacity. Neither occurred." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Emily acted in good faith," he said. "Good faith doesn't replace consent," Rachel replied. By the end of the meeting, Emily's authority was formally paused, not reversed. Paused. That was important. At the clinic, the atmosphere shifted. Staff members stopped whispering. Appointments resumed. Rescue cases were quietly reinstated. Karen from the shelter hugged me in the hallway without asking permission. "You're back," she said. "Not yet," I replied. Because I knew something, Emily didn't. Pausing control wasn't the same as reclaiming it. And Emily wasn't done. The following week, I received notice that Emily intended to challenge my sole authority as medical director, citing emotional decision-making and financial instability. I read the filing once. Then I smiled because she'd finally made her move. And it was exactly the one Rachel and I had been waiting for. Emily had turned a family conflict into a formal dispute, which meant everything now had to be proven, documented, measured. And in that arena, compassion backed by evidence is far more dangerous than anger. That night, as I locked up the clinic, I walked past the kennels and stopped in front of a new patient. A small, trembling terrier mix, ribs visible, eyes too old for his body. I knelt and let him sniff my hand. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I know what it's like to be treated like a liability." As I turned off the lights, I understood something with startling clarity. Emily thought this fight would expose my weakness. What it would actually expose was hers. Because the moment you try to strip someone of choice, you create a record. And records don't care about intentions. They care about facts. Emily's challenge arrived as a packet, not a conversation. Certified mail, formal language, words like concern, sustainability, fiduciary duty. Nowhere did it say what she actually meant, that she believed my love for animals made me unfit to decide the clinic's future. I read it once, then handed it to Rachel. "She's claiming I'm emotionally compromised," I said. Rachel nodded. which means she's positioning herself as rational authority. She's never watched an animal die because someone waited too long to approve a cost, I said. Rachel looked at me carefully. Then we don't argue values. We argue outcomes. That became our approach. Not rebuttal. Documentation. Over the next 2 weeks, we built a timeline. Every surgery Emily canceled or delayed. Every rescue case deferred. Every complaint logged after policy changes. Every deviation from standard veterinary practice where a non-licensed administrator interfered. What surprised me wasn't how much evidence existed. It was how easily it had been created. Control leaves fingerprints. At the clinic, Emily kept her distance. She stopped showing up in person, relying instead on emails copied to the lawyer. She used phrases like moving forward and best interests. Language designed to sound reasonable while avoiding responsibility. Staff noticed. Mark stopped CCing her on medical decisions. Jenna started keeping her own notes. Luis quietly forwarded me emails that made his stomach turn. "This feels wrong," he said one night as we closed up. "Like we're doing things to protect spreadsheets instead of patients." "Keep documenting," I said. "That's all I need." At home, the pressure intensified. My mother left voicemails about family dinners, about stress, about how hard this was on everyone. She never asked how I was doing. She asked when I'd stop. That distinction mattered. Rachel filed our response at the end of the month. It was precise, calm, devastating. We didn't accuse Emily of malice. We demonstrated incompetence where it mattered most, in understanding the legal and ethical limits of her role. The filing included expert opinions, statements from licensed veterinarians, comparative data showing improved outcomes under my decisions versus her interim policies. It also included something Emily hadn't anticipated: letters from clients, handwritten notes, emails, messages from people whose animals were alive because I'd chosen care over convenience. "I don't know what's going on behind the scenes," one woman wrote, "but if Dr. Cole leaves, I leave." That kind of loyalty doesn't come from branding. It comes from trust. Emily called me the night she received the filing. Her voice was tight. "You're turning people against me," she said. "I didn't ask anyone to write," I replied. "You're weaponizing sentiment," she snapped. "No," I said. "You discounted it. That's not the same thing." She was quiet for a moment. "You think this makes you righteous," she said. "I think it makes me responsible," I replied. "You're going to burn everything down," she warned. I thought of the clinic before her changes, of the animals, of my father's note. "No," I said. "I'm preventing that." She hung up. The hearing was scheduled for early spring. Not a courtroom spectacle. A formal mediation with regulatory oversight. Quiet. Controlled. Binding. Emily requested that my mother attend. Rachel advised against it. "This isn't about family anymore," she said. "It's about authority." On the day of the mediation, Emily arrived with confidence. A new suit, a new consultant, a binder that looked impressive until you opened it. I arrived with a single folder. Inside were records, logs, statements, licenses, a decade of consistent practice. When the mediator asked Emily to explain why she believed I should be removed from operational authority, she spoke smoothly. "Hannah is compassionate," she said. "But compassion can cloud judgment. The clinic needs objective leadership." The mediator turned to me. "Dr. Cole?" he asked. I didn't raise my voice. "Compassion is not the opposite of objectivity," I said. "It's the reason this clinic exists. Every decision I make is documented, evidence-based, and compliant with state standards." Emily interrupted. "You're ignoring the financial strain." I looked at the mediator. "May I respond?" He nodded. I slid a document across the table. "This is the clinic's profit margin for the past 5 years," I said. "It increased steadily under my leadership, including rescue cases." Emily frowned. "That's selective." "No," I said. "It's complete." The mediator studied the numbers. "And this," I continued, "is the margin during the 3 weeks my sister took control." Silence. The drop wasn't catastrophic. It was telling. Emily opened her mouth to explain, but Rachel spoke first. "The decline coincides with canceled procedures, client attrition, and delayed care," she said. "All decisions made without medical authority." The mediator leaned back. "Ms. Cole," he said to Emily, Can you explain why a non-licensed administrator overruled medical decisions? Emily hesitated. I was acting in the clinic's best interest, she said. That's not an answer, he replied. By the end of the session, the outcome was clear. Operational authority would be restored to me immediately. Emily would have no decision-making power over medical or administrative policy. Any future involvement would require formal consent and defined boundaries. The mediator looked at me as we stood to leave. Dr. Cole, he said, you a right to escalate this. I nodded once. Emily didn't look at me. Outside, my mother was waiting. Her face was pale. You embarrassed your sister, she said. I felt tired. Not angry. Just tired. She embarrassed herself, I replied. I just stopped protecting her from it. She shook her head. I don't recognize you. I met her eyes. That's because I'm no longer shrinking to be recognizable, I said. That night, I returned to the clinic after hours. I walked through each room, the kennels, the exam tables, the office that was slowly becoming mine again. I stopped at the door where my father's photo had been removed. I put it back, not as a statement, as a reminder. I hadn't fought for power. I'd fought for integrity. And in doing so, I'd learned something vital. People who confuse your care with weakness always panic when you stop absorbing their decisions. Because the moment you choose structure over silence, the truth stops being optional. And once that happens, control has nowhere left to hide. Restoring authority didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. On paper, everything snapped back into place quickly. Emails went out, systems reverted. Emily's access was revoked with a polite sentence that avoided naming what had actually happened. The clinic resumed its rhythm, but something underneath had changed. Trust, once disturbed, doesn't reset. It recalibrates. The staff watched me differently now. Not skeptically, carefully. As if they were waiting to see whether I would become harder, colder, more like the person who had tried to replace me. I didn't. I didn't need to. Control doesn't require cruelty. It requires clarity. The first thing I did was hold a staff meeting. No speeches, no dramatic reassurances. I want to be clear about one thing, I said. Medical decisions come from licensed professionals, always. If anyone feels pressured to act otherwise, I need to know. No one spoke, but shoulders relaxed. That was enough. Emily didn't come back to the clinic. Instead, she shifted tactics. 2 weeks after the mediation, I received a notice from the bank. A routine review, they said, triggered by changes in management structure. Rachel read it and nodded. She's pushing from the outside now. How? I asked. Financial pressure, she said. She's looking for a lever. Emily had always understood systems better than people. If she couldn't control the clinic directly, she would try to make it unsustainable. I requested a full financial audit, not because I suspected wrongdoing, but because I wanted everything visible, clean, documented, incontrovertible. That decision rattled my mother. You're inviting scrutiny, she said over the phone. Why would you do that? Because nothing holds up better than transparency, I replied. She sighed. You're turning this into a war. No, I said. I'm ending one. The audit took time. Weeks of questions, spreadsheets, interviews. The auditors were thorough and unemotional. They didn't care about family history. They cared about numbers and process. And that's when something unexpected surfaced. Not fraud, something subtler. A series of loans taken out against the clinic years earlier. Approved under my father's authority. Used, at least partially, to support Emily's early business ventures. I stared at the report in Rachel's office, heart steady but cold. He never told me, I said. Rachel didn't look surprised. He may not have thought he needed to. My father hadn't meant to hurt me. That much I still believed. But he had made decisions based on assumptions about who would carry the cost. Me. The clinic had absorbed those loans quietly, paid them down slowly. I had unknowingly covered the rest through years of reinvestment instead of salary increases. Emily hadn't just taken control. She'd been supported by it long before. Rachel was careful. This doesn't mean malicious intent, she said, but it does mean imbalance. I nodded. And imbalance, once documented, has consequences. Emily found out about the audit results before I spoke to her. She showed up at my house that evening. Not angry, scared. I didn't know about the loans, she said immediately. I believe you, I replied. That surprised her. You do? She asked. Yes, I said, but you benefited from them. And then you tried to take control of the thing that absorbed the cost. She sat down heavily. I thought I was helping, she said. I know, I replied. That doesn't make it harmless. She looked at me then. Really looked. You've changed, she said. No, I replied. I stopped compensating. She flinched. What happens now? She asked. I thought about that. Now, I said, we separate roles completely. Financially, legally. Her eyes widened. You're cutting me out. I'm drawing a boundary, I said. One I should have drawn years ago. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. You won't have access to the clinic, I continued, or its assets. Not directly, not indirectly. If you want to build something, it will be yours. Not funded by something you didn't carry. Tears welled in her eyes. Not performative. Real. You always get to be the good one, she said. The one people admire. I shook my head. I get to be the one who stayed, I said. That's different. She left shortly after. No resolution. No forgiveness. That night, I sat alone in the clinic, finishing charts. A kitten I'd treated earlier in the day slept in a carrier near my desk, recovering from surgery. She twitched occasionally, dreaming. Alive. Healing. I realized then that the clinic had survived not because it was profitable, but because it was grounded in care that people trusted. Emily had tried to convert that trust into leverage. She hadn't understood that trust collapses when you do that. The audit concluded the following week. Clean. Stable. The loans were addressed, reallocated, removed from the clinic's future obligations. For the first time since my father died, the business stood on its own. So did I. My mother didn't speak to me for a month after that. When she finally did, her voice was quiet. You didn't leave us a choice, she said. I gave myself one, I replied. There was a difference. As winter edged toward spring, the clinic filled again. Rescue cases returned. Referrals increased. Clients who had hesitated during the uncertainty came back. Life didn't go back to what it was. It moved forward. But I knew Emily hadn't finished processing what she'd lost. And people who believe they're entitled to something rarely accept boundaries without one last attempt to cross them. I felt it coming. Not fear. Anticipation. Because now, if she tried again, it wouldn't be quiet, and it wouldn't be private, and it wouldn't be mine to carry alone. Emily's last attempt didn't come through lawyers. It came through silence. Weeks passed without a word from her. No emails, no calls, no messages relayed through my mother. At first, it felt like relief. Then, it felt deliberate. People who are used to leverage don't disappear unless they're repositioning. The first sign showed up at the clinic on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A new client, well-dressed, nervous smile, too many questions about billing procedures before mentioning his dog. I noticed it immediately. What brings you in today? I asked gently, as his mixed-breed lab settled at his feet. Oh, just a checkup, he said. I'm doing some research. Research. That word again. He asked about payment plans, about how often we waived fees, about partnerships with shelters. His dog was healthy, calm. No real concerns. When he left, I flagged the appointment and made a note. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the county. Notice of review. Anonymous complaint. Allegations of inconsistent billing and preferential treatment. I read it once. Then again. Emily hadn't come at me directly. She'd gone to the system. I called Rachel immediately. She filed a complaint, I said. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Not necessarily her, she said, but someone with intimate knowledge. I want the records pulled, I said. All of them. By the end of the week, inspectors arrived. They were professional, polite, unemotional. They asked for documentation, treatment logs, billing records, charity cases. I gave them everything. Transparency is only terrifying when you have something to hide. The staff was tense. Jenna cried in the supply room. Mark clenched his jaw every time an inspector walked past. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I answered questions. At one point, one of the inspectors paused over a file. You do a lot of reduced fee work, she said. Yes, I replied. We document every case. And it's approved how? She asked. By me, I said. As the licensed medical director. She nodded and kept flipping pages. That afternoon, Karen from the shelter called. They contacted us, she said. Asked about referrals, about costs. And? I asked. I told them the truth, she said. That you save animals other clinics won't touch, and that you never cut corners. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I said. That night, Emily finally called. Her voice was calm. Too calm. You didn't think this would end quietly, did you? She asked. No, I replied. I assumed you'd escalate. You're bleeding goodwill, she said. People don't like uncertainty. People don't like manipulation, I said. She laughed softly. You think this makes you clean? I know it does, I replied, because I invited it. Silence. You always have to be right, she said. No, I replied. I just stopped letting you be. The inspection lasted 3 days. When it ended, the lead inspector handed me a card. We'll be in touch, she said. I nodded. The results arrived 2 weeks later. No violations, no penalties, commendation for documentation and ethical practice. One line stood out. The clinic demonstrates a consistent standard of care, exceeding county requirements, including in subsidized treatment cases. I framed that letter, not for ego. For record, Rachel was blunt when she read it. She overplayed her hand, she said. Yes, I replied. And now there's a trail. Emily had filed a complaint that resulted in an official review. A review that publicly validated my leadership and medical judgment. That mattered, because now any future attempt wouldn't look like concern. It would look like retaliation. My mother called that evening. Emily's furious, she said. I'm not responsible for her feelings, I replied. She says you humiliated her, my mother continued. I didn't mention her name, I said. The system did the rest. Silence. I don't know how to fix this, my mother said quietly. I'm not asking you to, I replied. After we hung up, I stayed late at the clinic. A storm rolled in. Rain tapped against the windows. The building felt alive in that way it only did after hours. I walked past the kennels and stopped in front of a dog I'd taken in temporarily. A pit mix with scars along his flank. History written into muscle and bone. He wagged his tail when he saw me. Yeah, I said softly. I know. Abuse doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks administrative, and people who've survived it recognize the signs in each other. Emily had tried to paint me as unstable, emotional, unfit. Instead, she'd created a record proving the opposite. She thought scrutiny would weaken me. It had strengthened my position. The next move, I knew, wouldn't be hers. It would be the system's. And systems move slowly, but they remember. The system didn't move loudly after the inspection. It adjusted. Quiet changes began rippling outward in ways Emily couldn't control or undo. The first was the bank. I received a call from a regional manager I'd never spoken to before. Polite, curious, he referenced the recent audit and county inspection, congratulated me on the outcome, then asked a simple question. Are there any additional parties with financial influence over the clinic? No, I said. Not anymore. Within a week, the clinic's credit terms improved. Interest rates lowered. A line of credit I hadn't requested was offered and approved based on stability metrics alone. Emily had tried to frame the clinic as financially reckless. The data told a different story. The second shift came from vendors. 2 long-standing suppliers reached out to renegotiate contracts. Better pricing, flexible payment windows. One representative admitted, a little awkwardly, that they'd been hesitant during the transition period, but now felt confident again. Confidence is contagious when it's backed by evidence. Emily. She showed up unannounced at the clinic for the first time in months. Not in heels this time. Flats, casual clothes. As if she were trying to blend back into a role she no longer had. I need to talk to you, she said. I didn't invite her into my office. We stood near the reception desk, in full view of staff. What about? You're locking me out, she said. I already did, I replied. Legally. Her jaw tightened. You're benefiting from everything Dad built. So are you, I said calmly. The difference is, I stayed and carried the responsibility. She lowered her voice. You're making me look like a villain. I met her. She shook her head. You don't understand how this looks. I understand exactly how it looks, I said. That's why I'm standing here instead of behind a closed door. People were listening, not staring, but aware, Emily noticed. She always noticed when the audience changed. This isn't over, she said quietly. I nodded. I know. She left without another word. That afternoon, Rachel forwarded me an email. Subject: Inquiry regarding prior complaint. The county wanted clarification. Specifically, they wanted to know who had submitted the anonymous complaint that triggered the inspection. Not because I'd requested it, because Emily had followed up, pressing for updates, pushing timelines, asking questions that only the original complainant would reasonably ask. That was the mistake. When people try to steer investigations, they often reveal themselves. Rachel's reply was simple. All relevant information has been provided. Any further inquiries should follow standard protocol. The county responded 2 days later. They had closed the matter, and they had flagged the complaint as retaliatory in nature. Not public, not dramatic, but permanent. That designation wouldn't ruin Emily's life. It would follow her. At home, my mother finally came over. She stood in the doorway like someone unsure of their welcome. I feel like I lost both my daughters, she said. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't go anywhere, I replied. I just stopped bending. She sat at the table, hands clasped. Emily says you never forgive, she said. I don't punish, I replied. I remember. She looked up sharply. That's not healthy, she said. It's honest, I replied. She stayed an hour. We talked around the truth, not through it. When she left, she hugged me tightly, like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. I didn't reassure her. That night, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. It was from the consultant Emily had hired months earlier, the one who'd reviewed compliance. He was no longer working with her. He'd found another role. And before he left, he wanted to say one thing. You weren't the problem. You were the constant. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Vindication is quieter than people expect. The real shift came a week later, during a routine staff meeting. Karen from the shelter attended, unannounced. She stood in front of everyone and said something simple. We're expanding our partnership, she said, because we trust this clinic. Applause broke out. Not polite. Genuine. I didn't smile. I felt steady. After the meeting, Mark lingered. She won't stop, will she? He asked. Not until she understands, I replied. Understands what? That access isn't a right, I said. It's earned. As spring edged closer, the clinic thrived. Not dramatically, sustainably. Emily faded from the center of things. Her influence shrank. Her options narrowed. Not because I pushed her out, but because every structure she tried to lean on now required transparency she couldn't control. One evening, as I locked up, I found a note taped to the door of my office. No signature. Just 4 words. You think you've won. I peeled it off, folded it once, and dropped it into the trash. Winning had never been the goal. Survival hadn't been either. This was about something far more difficult. Redefining the terms of love. Because when love requires you to surrender choice, it isn't love. It's ownership. And ownership, once challenged, always tries one last time to reassert itself. I didn't know exactly what Emily's final move would be, but I knew where it wouldn't land. Not on me. Not anymore. Emily's final move didn't target the clinic. It targeted my reputation. I found out the way these things usually surface now. Quietly. Indirectly. Through someone who didn't mean to be a messenger. Karen called me one morning before the clinic opened. I need to ask you something, she said carefully. Go ahead, I replied. Did you know your name came up in a grant committee meeting last night? I paused. In what context? Karen exhaled. Concerns were raised about instability, family conflict, whether long-term partnerships might be risky. There it was. Emily had shifted arenas. When she couldn't control the clinic and couldn't shake the system, she went after credibility. The kind that isn't defended in courtrooms, but whispered away in boardrooms. I thanked Karen and hung up. Then I sat very still. Because this wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. Emily knew exactly which circles mattered to me. Rescue networks, nonprofits, grant committees. The spaces where trust travels faster than facts. And she was trying to poison that well. By noon, I had 3 emails. Carefully worded. Neutral. People checking in, asking how things were going, whether everything was settled. I answered each one the same way. Yes, everything is documented and stable. I'm happy to provide records if needed. No defensiveness. No explanation unless requested. Rachel called me that afternoon. She's spreading narrative, she said. Not statements. Impression. What can we do? I asked. We don't chase rumors, Rachel replied. We anchor facts. That evening, we drafted a single document, not a rebuttal, not a defense. A summary. Clinic governance structure. Independent audits completed. County inspection cleared. Financial stability metrics. Letters of support from partner organizations. No mention of Emily. No mention of family. Just truth. We sent it quietly to every organization that mattered. Grant committees, rescue partners, veterinary networks. Not as a plea. As context. 2 days later, the first response came in. Thank you for the clarity. We appreciate transparency. Then another. We had concerns, but the documentation addresses them. Then one that made me sit back in my chair. We were unaware of the inspection outcome. This reassures us significantly. Emily had counted on something I no longer relied on. Silence. She believed if she whispered long enough, I'd retreat. She hadn't realized I'd learned how to speak without shouting. The call from my mother came that night. She says you're trying to ruin her, my mother said. I haven't mentioned her name in months, I replied. She feels erased, my mother insisted. I closed my eyes. That's how. Silence. You could still fix this, my mother said. By apologizing for protecting myself? I asked. No, she said. By letting her back in. I opened my eyes. I let her in my life, I said. Not my livelihood. That distinction had become my line. Emily didn't call me after that. Instead, I heard from someone else, the consultant. Again. He was leaving town. New position, new state. Before he left, he sent one last message. She tried to use me to validate a story. I declined. That's when I understood what this really was. I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't need him to. The story Emily had been telling wasn't about concern or responsibility. It was about entitlement, the belief that proximity gave her authority. That shared history entitled her to influence. But proximity isn't permission. That lesson tends to arrive late for people who've never been denied. The last piece fell into place the following week. The county sent an update. Short. Procedural. The anonymous complaint had been formally categorized as retaliatory. Any future complaints from the same source would require corroboration before action. Emily had closed her own door. I printed the email and placed it in the folder with my father's note. Not for leverage, for closure. That weekend, I drove out of town for the first time in months. No emergencies, no staff calls, just me and the road. I stopped at a rest area and watched people walk their dogs. Leashes, treats, small acts of care. Animals don't respond to power. They respond to consistency. That's why they notice when something shifts. Back at the clinic on Monday, I made a final decision. I filed updated bylaws, clear succession plans, defined authority, independent oversight. No room for assumption, no room for reinterpretation. When Rachel reviewed them, she smiled. She can't touch you now, she said. I nodded. I know, I replied. Emily hadn't lost because I fought harder. She lost because I stopped absorbing her choices. And when you remove yourself as a buffer, people are forced to face the systems they manipulate. As I locked up that night, I looked around the clinic one last time, not with fear, with ownership, not the kind that excludes others, the kind that knows exactly where the lines are and doesn't apologize for drawing them. The quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was recalibration. For the first time since Emily signed those papers behind my back, nothing was actively breaking. No letters, no inspections, no calls asking me to explain myself. The systems I'd put in place were doing what systems are supposed to do, when they're built correctly. They held. That's when the emotional weight finally showed up. Not as grief, not as anger, as fatigue. I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd taken a full day off without guilt. The clinic was stable, the staff competent, the animals cared for, and yet my body was still braced, waiting for impact that wasn't coming. That's the cost of prolonged vigilance. Even when the threat disappears, your nervous system doesn't get the memo right away. I scheduled a Friday off. No errands, no meetings, just rest. That morning, I received an email from a law firm I didn't recognize. Subject: Estate Clarification Inquiry. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it. They represented my mother, not Emily, not the family lawyer, a new firm. The message was brief. Your mother is updating her will and has questions regarding prior financial entanglements involving the clinic. She would like to clarify boundaries to avoid future disputes. I stared at the screen. This wasn't reconciliation. This was containment. Rachel confirmed it when I forwarded her the email. She's separating assets, she said, likely at Emily's insistence. They're trying to prevent another conflict. Do I need to respond? I asked. You should, she replied. Briefly, professionally. I did. All clinic-related assets are now legally distinct and independently governed. I have no claim to personal estates beyond what is documented. No emotion, no accusation, just fact. That afternoon, my mother called. I didn't want you to hear from a lawyer first, she said. You didn't, I replied. I heard from the truth, she sighed. I'm trying to keep the family intact, she said. I'm trying to keep myself intact, I replied. Those goals aren't always compatible. She didn't argue. That was new. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. People started asking me for advice, not about animals, about boundaries. A colleague from another clinic asked how I handled family involvement. A rescue director asked how to protect nonprofit partnerships from personal influence. Even Mark pulled me aside one evening. I watched my parents run a business together, he said. They destroyed each other. I didn't know there was another way. There is, I said. But it's lonely at first. He nodded. Worth it, though. It was. But not because it felt good. Because it felt honest. The clinic hosted its annual open house in early summer, a tradition my father had loved. Families came. Kids met animals. Former patients returned. Older, slower, still loved. Emily didn't attend. Neither did my mother. I hadn't invited them. I didn't exclude them either. I simply stopped managing their presence. Halfway through the afternoon, Karen pulled me aside. You know the state association is watching you now, she said. In what way? I asked. Good way, she replied. Leadership committee, ethics board. They like how you handled the complaint. I smiled faintly. I didn't do anything special, I said. That's why they like it, she replied. That evening, as I cleaned up, I found something tucked into the old file cabinet in my office. A document I hadn't seen before. My father's handwriting. A draft will, never finalized. In it, the clinic was mentioned. Not as property, as stewardship. Hannah will decide what this place becomes. She always understood why it mattered. I sat down and let that sentence settle. My father hadn't trusted me because I was obedient. He trusted me because I cared, without trying to control. Emily had never understood that difference. I didn't share the document with anyone. I didn't need to. It wasn't leverage. It was confirmation. That night, I went home and slept without setting an alarm. The world didn't collapse. The clinic didn't burn. No one took anything from me while I rested. That's when I knew the fight was truly over. Not because Emily stopped pushing, but because I stopped orienting my life around her pressure. And when you stop doing that, people lose their grip without realizing when it happened. The first apology came in the form of a question. Emily didn't call. She sent a message. Short, unpolished, no legal tone. Can we talk? Just us? I read it once, then set my phone down and finished the chart I was working on. When you spend years being pulled into other people's urgency, choosing when to respond becomes its own kind of freedom. I didn't answer that day or the next. On the third day, she showed up at the clinic, not inside. She waited in her car. Mark came to my office and knocked lightly. She's outside, he said. Didn't want to come in. That mattered too. I stepped out after my last appointment. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet hour where the building exhales. Emily got out of the car slowly. She looked tired. Not strategically tired, just worn. I'm not here to argue, she said quickly. I swear. I nodded once, then talk. She hesitated, then took a breath. I didn't know who I was without being needed, she said. And when you stopped needing me, I panicked. I waited. I told myself I was protecting you, she continued. But I was protecting my place. There it was. Not remorse. Recognition. I crossed lines, she said. And when you didn't fold, I tried to make you look unstable so I wouldn't have to feel wrong. She looked at me then. Eyes glossy but steady. I'm sorry. I didn't rush to answer. I believe you, I said finally. Her shoulders sagged with relief. That doesn't mean things go back, I continued. It means I hear you. She nodded. I know. We stood there in silence. No reconciliation music. No hug. Just two adults standing in the aftermath of something that couldn't be undone. "I won't interfere again," she said. "Not with the clinic, not with your work." "I know," I replied, "because you can't." That wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. She accepted it. When she left, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Later that week, Rachel called with one last update. "The retaliatory flag on the complaint is now part of the permanent record," she said. "Nothing active, but it's there." "Good," I replied. "Most people would feel relieved," she said. "You sound settled." "I am," I said. That weekend, I drove out to the lake where my father used to take me fishing when I was a kid. I hadn't been there since he got sick. The dock was weathered, the water calm. I sat there alone and let memories surface without chasing them away. He hadn't been perfect. He'd made decisions for me instead of with me. But he'd believed in the work, in the quiet kind of responsibility that doesn't ask for applause. That was what I'd inherited. Not ownership, stewardship. Back at the clinic, I made one final structural change. I brought in a small board of advisors. Not family, not friends, professionals. People who would challenge me when needed and support me when earned. No more blind spots. No more assumptions. When I announced it to the staff, Mark smiled. "About time," he said. I smiled back. "You stayed," I told him. "So did you," he replied. As summer settled in, life became something quieter than happiness. It became sustainable. I still worked long hours, still lost sleep over critical cases, still carried the weight of decisions that meant life or death. But I no longer carried other people's fear of losing control. That weight had never been mine. One evening, as I was closing up, a young woman came in with a rescued hound. Nervous, unsure, apologizing for asking questions. "You don't have to apologize," I told her gently. "This is your choice." She looked at me like no one had ever said that to her before. That was the moment I realized the ripple had gone farther than I thought. Boundaries teach people what choice looks like. Emily's apology didn't fix the past, but it closed the loop. And loops, once closed, stop pulling you backward. The last thing that changed wasn't legal. It was internal. One morning in early fall, I was standing in the treatment room, watching a senior cat wake up from anesthesia. Slow blinks, shallow breaths, the steady rise and fall that tells you've done enough. And now all that's left is time. I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not the next email, not the next accusation, not the next attempt to take something from me. The vigilance had finally loosened its grip. The clinic ran without me hovering. Staff made decisions and documented them. Clients trusted the process. Rescue partners didn't ask for favors, only collaboration. The systems I'd put in place were boring in the best possible way. Predictable, accountable, calm. Emily kept her distance. When we spoke, it was polite, brief, about neutral things. She didn't ask for access. She didn't test boundaries. She'd learned what testing cost. My mother sent a message on my birthday. A simple one. "I hope you're well. I'm proud of the woman you've become." No apologies, no explanations. I accepted it for what it was, not closure. Acknowledgement. At work, I was invited to join a regional veterinary ethics panel. Not because of the drama, because of how I handled it. Quietly, documented, without spectacle. I said yes. Not for prestige, for alignment. The first meeting was uneventful. Policy discussions, case studies, long pauses where people thought before speaking. I felt at home in that rhythm. Afterward, a woman on the panel pulled me aside. "I heard about what happened with your clinic," she said. "You could have scorched the earth." "I didn't want to," I replied. She nodded. "That restraint changes the outcome." It had. Not because it spared anyone, because it spared me. Late one evening, I found myself alone in the clinic again. The lights dimmed, the building quiet. I walked through each room the way I had months earlier, but this time without bracing. I stopped in my office. My father's photo was still there. The note he'd written, tucked safely away. The framed county letter on the wall. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. I thought about the moment Emily signed those papers without me. How small that had made me feel. How quickly I'd questioned myself, my instincts, my right to decide. That was the real damage, not the attempted takeover, the erosion of self-trust. It's what control always goes after first. I sat down at my desk and opened a new document. Not a legal file, not a policy, a letter, not to Emily, not to my mother, to myself. I wrote that love without consent is not love, that silence is not peace if it costs you choice, that doing the right thing quietly still counts, that you don't have to explain your boundaries to people who benefit from you having none. I saved the document and closed my laptop. Outside, the parking lot was empty. The air smelled like leaves and rain. I locked the door and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. I hadn't won. I hadn't lost. I had chosen. And that choice changed the shape of my life. If you're listening to this and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to hear this part clearly. You don't owe access to people who confuse love with control. You don't owe silence to keep others comfortable. You don't owe yourself erasure to maintain the illusion of family harmony. Sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't payback. It's reclaiming your right to decide. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, managed, or quietly pushed aside by people who claimed it was for your own good, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what part stayed with you. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about family drama, betrayal, inheritance, and the quiet kind of karma where the tables turn without shouting, don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care of yourself. Choosing yourself isn't cruelty, it's clarity.